She posted, "My body, my choice," with a bikini pic while on a girl's trip with her ex. I didn't comment. Just canceled her return flight and changed the locks. She's been stranded at the airport for 5 hours calling me. But I'm at dinner with her sister. I, 32 discovered something that shattered my world exactly 6 days ago, and I'm still processing whether what I did was justified or if I've become someone I don't recognize. My wife had been planning this girl's trip for months. She told me it was with her college friends, a chance to reconnect and decompress from work stress. I supported it completely. We've been married 3 years, and I believed in maintaining friendships and personal space. She seemed excited, talking about spa days and beach time, showing me the resort photos online. The morning she left, she kissed me goodbye and promised to call every evening. Everything felt normal. I drove her to the airport, helped with her bags, and watched her disappear through security with a smile and a wave. For the first 2 days, our conversations were brief but sweet. She told me about the beautiful weather, the resort amenities, how relaxing it felt to disconnect from everyday responsibilities. I was genuinely happy for her, working late to catch up on projects so I could give her my full attention when she returned. Then came day 3. I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break when I saw it. A photo that made my blood freeze in my veins. My wife, in a red bikini I'd never seen before, laughing on a beach. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, his arm casually draped around her waist, was her ex-boyfriend. The same ex she'd dated for 4 years before we met. The same ex she claimed to have no contact with anymore. The caption read, "My body, my choice. Living my best life. Sometimes you have to take what makes you happy." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This wasn't some chance encounter. The comfortable way they stood together, the matching resort wristbands, the fact that he was clearly staying at the same place. This was planned. Calculated. A complete betrayal of everything I thought we had. I called her immediately. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. A text message asking her to call me went unread for hours. That evening, when she finally called, I asked directly about the photo. She laughed it off, claiming it was just a coincidence that he happened to be at the same resort. She said they'd run into each other at the pool bar, taken a few friendly photos, nothing more. Her voice carried that particular tone people use when they're working too hard to sound casual. I asked why she hadn't mentioned this coincidence earlier. She became defensive, asking why I was being so paranoid and controlling. She reminded me that I'd always known they'd maintained a friendship. Though that wasn't true, she'd told me specifically that they'd lost touch years ago. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me. I spent that night wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Every interaction from the past few months replayed in my mind. The late nights at work that suddenly became more frequent. The phone calls she'd taken in another room. The way she'd started being more secretive about her social media activity. Signs I'd dismissed as normal life fluctuations now felt like puzzle pieces forming a devastating picture. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our shared phone account and checked her recent activity. My heart sank as I saw the evidence. Hundreds of text messages and calls to his number over the past 2 months. Late-night conversations that lasted hours. The communication had intensified dramatically in the weeks leading up to this trip. I screenshotted everything before she could delete it. Then I called the resort directly. After explaining I was trying to reach my wife, the helpful desk clerk confirmed they had 2 rooms booked under their names. Adjacent rooms. Both bookings made on the same day, 6 weeks ago. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a reunion. A romantic getaway disguised as a girls' trip. That afternoon, she posted another photo. This time they were having dinner together, wine glasses raised in a toast. The caption was even more pointed. To second chances and following your heart. Something inside me snapped. I've always considered myself a reasonable person. Patient. Forgiving. The type who talks through problems rather than acting impulsively. But seeing my wife celebrating her betrayal publicly while lying to my face triggered something primal. I opened my laptop and accessed our airline account. Her return flight was still changeable without penalty. I canceled it without hesitation. Next, I called a locksmith. He could come that afternoon to change all the locks on our house. I authorized the work immediately. Then I did something that surprised even me. I texted her sister. Her sister had always been kind to me, and I sensed she'd never fully approved of my wife's tendency toward drama and selfishness. I sent her a simple message explaining what I discovered and asking if she'd like to have dinner that evening. Nothing romantic, just someone to talk to who might understand the family dynamics I was dealing with. She responded within an hour, expressing shock and agreeing to meet. My wife's flight was scheduled to land at 6 in the evening. I turned off my phone and went to meet her sister at a quiet restaurant across town. Her sister was genuinely upset when I showed her the evidence. She admitted she'd suspected something was happening, but hadn't known how to address it. She told me about conversations where my wife had mentioned feeling trapped in our marriage, wondering if she'd settled too quickly, fantasizing about what life might have been like with her ex. We talked for hours, not about romance or revenge, but about family loyalty, about the patterns of behavior she'd witnessed growing up, about how some people never learn to value what they have until it's gone. Around 9 o'clock, my phone started buzzing. I turned it back on to check the time, and immediately dozens of missed calls and text messages flooded in. My wife had landed to discover her ride home had been canceled. She tried calling me repeatedly, growing increasingly frantic as she realized I wasn't responding. The messages evolved from confused to angry to desperate. She'd eventually called a taxi, only to discover she couldn't get into our house. The locks had been changed, and I wasn't there to let her in. The final message, sent just 20 minutes earlier, was different in tone. She'd apparently called her sister looking for support, only to be told that she was currently having dinner with me. Now she knew this wasn't just about a canceled flight or changed locks. This was about consequences. Her sister and I finished our meal slowly. We weren't celebrating or plotting revenge. We were just two people who'd been affected by someone's selfish choices, finding comfort in honest conversation. When I finally drove home around 11, my wife was sitting on our front steps. Her luggage surrounded her like a fortress of poor decisions. She looked exhausted and defeated. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car for several minutes, watching her through the windshield. Part of me wanted to unlock the door and pretend this whole nightmare could be resolved with conversation and forgiveness. But a larger part of me knew that some betrayals change everything permanently. I got out of the car and walked toward the house. She stood up immediately, launching into an explanation that sounded rehearsed. She claimed the whole thing had been innocent, that I was overreacting, that canceling her flight and changing the locks was cruel and extreme. I listened without interrupting, then quietly told her I'd seen the phone records. I'd spoken with the resort. I knew about the adjacent rooms and the coordinated booking dates. Her expression shifted from defiant to defeated. The lies crumbled, and for the first time since this started, she looked genuinely remorseful. She asked if we could go inside and talk properly. I told her the locks had been changed for a reason. She could collect some clothes and personal items, but this house was no longer her home. The conversation that followed was brutal but necessary. She admitted the affair had been going on for months. She confessed that the girl's trip had been entirely fabricated. She acknowledged that she'd been planning to ask for a separation when she returned, but wanted one last romantic weekend to confirm her feelings. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, but the calculated nature of it. She'd been planning her exit strategy while I'd been planning our future. Update 1. 3 days have passed since that confrontation on our front steps, and the situation has become even more complex than I initially anticipated. My wife spent those first 2 nights at a hotel, apparently trying to reach me constantly through calls, texts, emails, and even messages sent through mutual friends. I blocked her number after the first day when it became clear she was more focused on managing the fallout than taking genuine responsibility for her choices. Yesterday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Her ex-boyfriend showed up at my workplace. I was coming back from lunch when I found him waiting by my car in the parking lot. My initial instinct was confrontational, but something about his demeanor seemed off. He looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. He told me he needed to speak with me about what had happened. I almost walked away, but curiosity got the better of me. What he told me changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. According to him, my wife had been pursuing him for months, not the other way around. She'd contacted him initially under the pretense of planning a surprise for a mutual friend's birthday, then gradually shifted the conversations toward their past relationship. She'd been the one to suggest the trip, to book the adjacent rooms, to orchestrate the entire scenario. He claimed he'd been hesitant from the beginning, knowing she was married, but she'd convinced him that our marriage was already over. She'd told him we were separated, but living together for financial reasons until the divorce was finalized. She'd said I was controlling and emotionally abusive, that she'd been planning to leave me for months. He showed me screenshots of their conversations to prove his point. Reading through them was like seeing our entire marriage through a funhouse mirror. She'd twisted every normal disagreement into evidence of my alleged controlling behavior. She'd reframed my supportiveness as possessiveness, my trust as naivety. The most shocking revelation was that she'd been telling him I was already seeing someone else. According to her story, I'd been having an affair with her sister for months, and she'd discovered it weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd fabricated an affair between her sister and me to justify her actual affair with him. He'd realized something was wrong when I canceled her flight and changed the locks. Her reaction had been too extreme, too panicked. for someone whose husband supposedly already knew about their separation and was having his own affair. He'd started asking questions, and her story had fallen apart quickly. Now he was at my workplace, apparently feeling guilty about being manipulated into participating in the destruction of my marriage, wanting to set the record straight. I thanked him for the information, but told him I wasn't interested in maintaining any relationship with him moving forward. Whatever his intentions had been, he'd still chosen to be with a married woman. His guilt didn't erase that choice. That evening, I received a call from a lawyer. My wife had apparently consulted with a divorce attorney and was threatening legal action over my changing the locks and canceling her flight. According to the lawyer, she was claiming I'd stranded her intentionally and was restricting her access to marital property. I scheduled my own consultation immediately. My lawyer reviewed the evidence I'd gathered, the phone records, the resort booking information, the social media posts, and the screenshots her ex had provided. His assessment was straightforward. Her adultery and the deceptive nature of the trip would likely protect me from any claims of wrongful exclusion from the home. More importantly, he helped me understand my legal options moving forward. The house was in my name only, purchased before our marriage with my money. Most of our major assets were similarly separate. The marriage had been relatively short with no children. A divorce would be complicated but not devastating. That night, her sister called me. She'd been receiving increasingly frantic messages from my wife, who was apparently spinning an elaborate story about how I'd manipulated the situation and turned the family against her. She was claiming that her ex-boyfriend and I had somehow conspired to trap her, that the evidence had been fabricated, that I was the one who'd been unfaithful. Her sister wasn't buying it. She'd known about the inconsistencies in my wife's stories long before I discovered the affair. Apparently, my wife had a history of rewriting reality to suit her narrative, something the family had been dealing with for years. More significantly, her sister told me something that put the final pieces of the puzzle together. 6 months ago, my wife had asked to borrow money from her family, claiming we were having financial difficulties and needed help with house payments. Her sister had been suspicious because she knew about my job and our lifestyle, which didn't suggest financial stress. She'd offered to speak with me directly about budgeting or assistance, but my wife had insisted that would embarrass me too much. Now it made sense. My wife had been planning her exit strategy for months. She'd been gathering money, reconnecting with her ex, and setting up a narrative that would justify her departure while making me the villain. The girls' trip wasn't just about rekindling an old romance. It was supposed to be the final step in a long-term plan to transition from our marriage to a relationship with him, with minimal consequences to her reputation or finances. Update 2. A week has passed since my last update, and the situation has reached a resolution I never could have anticipated. My wife's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative finally backfired spectacularly. 3 days ago, she made a critical mistake. Frustrated by her inability to reach me directly and apparently convinced that I was somehow manipulating everyone around us, she decided to go public with her version of events. She posted a lengthy statement on social media, painting herself as the victim of an abusive, controlling marriage. She claimed I'd isolated her from friends and family, monitored her communications, and retaliated violently when she tried to seek support from an old friend who happened to be at the same resort. The post was detailed and emotional, describing years of alleged psychological abuse, financial control, and social isolation. She claimed the photo with her ex had been completely innocent, just two friends taking a picture together, and that my reaction proved how dangerous and unstable I'd become. She tagged mutual friends, family members, and even some of my colleagues, apparently hoping to gather support and pressure me into responding. The strategy backfired immediately. Within hours, people who actually knew us began responding with confusion and skepticism. Friends pointed out that they'd regularly seen us together at social events where she'd seemed happy and engaged. Family members noted that I'd never restricted her activities or communications in any way they'd witnessed. More damaging to her narrative, several people began sharing their own screenshots of recent conversations with her where she'd expressed very different sentiments about our marriage and her plans. One mutual friend posted a screenshot of a conversation from just 2 weeks before the trip, where my wife had been excited about a vacation we were supposedly planning for our anniversary next month. Another shared messages where she'd been asking for restaurant recommendations for a surprise dinner she was planning for my birthday. But the most devastating response came from her ex-boyfriend. Apparently, seeing her public accusations of abuse had triggered his conscience. He posted his own statement, complete with screenshots of their conversations, thoroughly documenting how she'd pursued him, lied about our marriage status, and orchestrated the entire affair. His post was factual and regretful, acknowledging his poor judgment, but making clear that he'd been manipulated by her false claims about our relationship. He even included the messages where she'd claimed I was abusive and already cheating with her sister. The evidence was overwhelming and public. Her carefully constructed narrative collapsed within hours. The aftermath was swift and brutal for her reputation. Friends and family members who'd initially been sympathetic began expressing anger at being manipulated. Several people shared their own experiences of her tendency to exaggerate or fabricate drama for attention. Her sister called me that evening, apologizing for her family's initial skepticism and expressing disgust at how my wife had tried to weaponize false abuse allegations. The next morning, I received a call from my wife's lawyer. She was now interested in a quick, quiet divorce with minimal contested issues. The public exposure had apparently convinced her that fighting would only make things worse. Yesterday, we met at the lawyer's office to discuss terms. It was the first time I'd seen her since that night on our front steps. She looked exhausted and defeated. The confidence and defiance had been replaced by genuine remorse and embarrassment. For the first time since this began, her apology seemed authentic rather than strategic. She admitted that she'd been planning to leave our marriage for months, but had been too cowardly to be honest about it. She acknowledged that fabricating the abuse allegations had been desperate and wrong. She even apologized for trying to manipulate her ex-boyfriend and damage relationships with our mutual friends. The divorce terms were straightforward. She would take her personal belongings and the car that was in her name. I would keep the house and the majority of our shared assets, which was fair given that most had been mine before the marriage anyway. She agreed to sign a statement acknowledging that her social media posts had contained false allegations made in anger, and that our marriage had ended due to her infidelity rather than any abusive behavior on my part. Most importantly for my peace of mind, she agreed to a non-disparagement clause in the divorce agreement. Any future attempts to publicly misrepresent our relationship or make false allegations would result in financial penalties. The meeting lasted less than 2 hours. We shook hands afterward, and she told me she hoped I'd be happy. For the first time in weeks, I believed she meant it. Last night, I had dinner with her sister again. Not as an act of revenge this time, but as genuine friends who'd both been affected by this situation. She told me that my wife had called their parents to confess everything and apologize for the embarrassment she'd caused the family. Apparently, this pattern of dramatic relationship chaos had been going on since high school. Multiple boyfriends had been subjected to similar manipulation and false narratives when relationships ended. The family had been hoping marriage might help her mature, but instead it had just provided a bigger stage for the same destructive patterns. Her sister expressed relief that the truth had come out so clearly, preventing any long-term damage to my reputation or relationships. Today marks exactly 2 weeks since I first saw that photo of my wife with her ex-boyfriend. In that time, I've gone from feeling betrayed and angry to feeling genuinely free. The revenge I'd initially sought by canceling her flight and changing the locks had been impulsive and emotional. But it had also been the catalyst for revealing the depth of deception in our marriage and protecting me from what could have been years of manipulation and false narratives. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't elaborate revenge or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply refusing to participate in someone else's lies and letting the truth speak for itself. My wife is now staying with friends while she looks for her own apartment. Her ex-boyfriend has apparently cut all contact with her after realizing the extent of her manipulation. Our mutual friends have been supportive, and my relationship with her family remains positive. The divorce should be finalized within the next few months. I'm already looking forward to rebuilding my life with the wisdom that comes from surviving someone else's attempt to destroy it. The locks have been changed, but more importantly, so have I. I've learned to trust my instincts, to value honesty above harmony, and to recognize that some people will always choose drama over integrity. I'm having dinner with her sister again next week. Not because of any lingering connection to my soon-to-be ex-wife, but because genuine friendships can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. The airport where my wife was stranded for 5 hours is now just a metaphor for the space between her lies and reality. I'm no longer interested in picking her up from either place.